So first, I want to remind people that the Morin Academy is going to start another short series on August 23rd, and it will run on Tuesdays at 7 p.m. to 8:30 p.m.-ish until September 20th. And it is going to be a mashup of two different works, Mackenzie Wark's A Hacker Manifesto and Jack Kloppenberg's First the Seed. The title of this series is Agricultural Biotechnology and the Information Economy. If you've followed us for a while, you know the Morin Academy is a lot about agriculture, the environment, and how political, economic, and religious views can be brought to bear on fundamental problems in agriculture and environment. Jacob Hanshu and myself will be dialoguing about these works in sections, and we are inviting an audience through Eventbrite. So if you are interested, we're doing a donation model on this one. Look for more information on Eventbrite. All right, well, so as promised, I want to get back into my series of Thucydides. So today I want to talk about the root cause of civil war. In this case, Thucydides' treatment of the Corcyraean civil war, which occurred in the 5th year of the Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta. Thucydides uses the Corcyraean civil war as really an example of civil war more generally. To him, it stands in for civil war, and it will help him to explain what he thinks causes civil conflict and civil war. And he does this here. He says in book 3, "And so there fell upon the cities, on account of revolutions, many grievous calamities, such as happen and always will happen, while human nature is the same. For in peace and prosperity, both states and individuals have gentler feelings, because men are not then forced to face conditions of dire necessity. But war, which robs men of the easy supply of their daily wants, is a rough schoolmaster, and creates in most people a temper that matches their condition." So notice a couple of things here. He's saying that there is such a thing as human nature, and it will always, pretty much always remain the same. That we will always have these types of disasters, that there will never be a time when we will escape them. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to figure out what the causes are and prevent them. It just means that he doesn't have a hope that somehow human nature is going to be improved ultimately in its intrinsic nature, okay? And then notice also that it is war that creates this context in which the bad side of human nature comes out. We are capable of gentler feelings, he says, but only during times that are good. But as soon as people have stress on them, and war creates the ultimate stress, it's going to bring out the worst in people. And it's the worst in people that causes civil strife. Countrymen turning against countrymen. Okay, the Corcyraean Civil War, as I said, started in the 5th year, and it has some qualities that are really quite striking because they seem quite modern. It is a proxy war of sorts, a civil conflict that is fought by two parties that basically represent the two larger sides in the Peloponnesian War, Sparta and Athens. They're both class-based parties, the party of the rich, the oligarchical party, and we have the party of the poor, the Democratic Party, okay? And the conflict in Corcyra that erupts is definitely between these two parties, okay? It is between the oligarchs and the Democrats, and they are fighting over who will rule and how, what type of government they will have and who the country will be allied with. Will it be Sparta and the Corinthians, who are their allies, or will it be Athens? Also, we see strong sacrilegious elements here, people willing to violate religious law in the most extreme way, and we see language and deeds that are equally fanatical and extreme and remind us of some of the worst events of the 20th century as well as now. And it makes you realize that a lot of things go way back and have not changed as much as we would like to think. They've gotten not worse and not better in some ways. So how this all got started, well, in a way, it really doesn't matter. But, Thucydides teaches there's always something, there's always that thing that touches it off. And then there's really always a much deeper reason that doesn't have that much to do with what actually just touched it off, lit the match, so to speak. Okay. In this case, the Corinthians, who were allies of Sparta, released 250 Corcyraean prisoners that they'd been holding after those prisoners promised that when they got back to Corcyra, they would basically start fomenting revolution. They'd try to like stir up trouble and get the oligarchs to revolt against the Democrats who were in control of the country. So they did that, and they basically tried their best, and they got some results, but they didn't turn the people away from the Democrat Party, so to speak, or from the alliance with Athens. The Corcyraeans got a little bit more friendly to the Corinthians and the Spartans, but that's about it. So they failed, though it sounds like they tried pretty hard. So then ensued a type of fighting that went beyond that kind of like ideological canvassing, okay? I have a picture of Machiavelli there because Machiavelli says that human beings fight two different ways. They fight like men and they fight like animals. And the first thing they tend to try is to fight like men or like human beings. In this case, to use the law. Okay, to use law and custom is fighting like men, okay, because it's attempting to use some reason and not resort to violence or deception. In this case, the oligarchs sued the leader of the Democrat Party, Pythias, but it was unsuccessful, which is predictable because the oligarchs weren't in charge of the government. In turn, then, the Democrats sued the 5 wealthiest oligarch fomenters who had previously been out there trying to gin up a revolution against them. Now, I can't even remember whether they won that lawsuit. They probably did. Yes, they did. That's right. They did. And not only did they win it, but they imposed huge fines. And because the fines were so huge, the oligarchs submitted themselves to a temple, sought asylum, and this was a move that they would do to try to then force negotiation. They wanted to pay the fine in installments, believe it or not. Okay. Well, other oligarchs in the meantime continued to organize and became more violent. And so the fighting turned to fighting like animals. The oligarchs killed 60 people in the Senate, some of them senators, some of them bystanders. And in the wake of that, they ruled very briefly through their overtaking of the government. But ultimately, they were outmatched by the numbers of the people. The people recruited and organized, and in particular, they recruited the slaves of the city, and all together retook the city and reestablished the Democrat control, okay? The oligarchs then sought refuge in the temple of Hera, quite a number of them, so that they wouldn't be killed. Again, this was a move that was respected. It was supposed to give people asylum. You weren't supposed to go into a temple and kill people who were seeking asylum there. If they left, then that would be another matter, but they, as long as they were there, they were supposed to be protected. Well, the Athenians brought more ships in, and when those ships arrived and kind of to back up the Corcyraean democracy, it emboldened the people, and they became even more violent. And the next move that they made was truly quite shocking. First, they used the occasion of the escalating ideological violence to kill their personal enemies. How does Thucydides know this? Well, he did most of his research through hearsay, through talking to people. and people who talk to people. And so I can only imagine that he heard stories of revenge, where people thought, well, now's my chance. I've hated this person for 20 years. They wronged me. They cheated on me or whatever it was. And now is my chance. So I can kill them in the name of the state, or in the name of revolution, right? Or I guess it would be in the name of keeping their revolution. After doing that, they then turned to the prisoners in the temple, I should say the asylum seekers in the temple, and they took 50 of them out, put them on a summary trial. So it's not really a trial, and killed the 50 of them. In the wake of that, so it was very obvious that the rest of these, there was only a certain amount of time before everybody in that temple was going to be slaughtered. Thucydides says the remaining oligarchs thought it was better for them to kill themselves than to wait for whatever cruel and dishonorable treatment was going to be dished out to them by the party of the people. And so they dispatched themselves with their own weapons. So you can imagine the scene at this temple, okay? It's like the opposite of what should happen. It showed complete disrespect for religious law and custom. And after that, a general slaughter ensued on both sides. And this should remind you of the situation in the plague, where in that case, it was the pressure and stress of the plague that brought out the worst in people, that created a lack of religion. Thucydides says people stopped praying and doing religious ceremonies and even burying the dead because they couldn't believe in God anymore. And once they didn't believe in the gods, I should say, anymore, then they just felt free to do whatever they wanted. Same thing applies here. At some point, people just stopped, at least temporarily, stopped believing enough or caring enough, and threw caution to the wind. So that lack of religious fear, of law and custom, it goes along with this escalating extremism in which people feel free to do the most heinous possible crimes. Because if they can kill people in the temple who have submitted as asylum seekers, then they can pretty much do anything they want. Thucydides says that there is a complete inversion of values as this extremism and fanaticism and violence commenced. People who were inclined to speak with wisdom, for instance, older people who'd been through a heck of a lot and who'd realized that maybe ideological conflict was not, all it was cracked up to be, or that having one party rule and not the other was not the most important thing, and that maybe it was time to stop before a complete disaster happened. People like that who counseled moderation were called cowards and were laughed to scorn, he says, okay? And people who were rash and indecent and full of anger and obscenity, these were the people who were considered to be the leaders, the people that you looked up to, the heroic people, the role models, okay? It tended to favor the youth over the young, he says, for that reason. Although these days it seems like old people are just as likely to be fanatics as young people. Something else has happened. But I guess he estimated that if people lived long enough, they got some wisdom. Those people became disrespected in a society where age still was respected for something. So ultimately, Thucydides doesn't just recount events here. As usual, he gives analysis, and he really wants to get to the heart of what's to blame. Now, we know that the context of general war is part of the situation. Part of what's to blame is the context. But that's not moral blame, that's just a fact, right? That you have this war that's going on between Athens and Sparta. It's created a lot of stress and deprivation and fear. That creates the context, but not just for fear, but for advantage taking. And this is where Thucydides gives us a lesson that was later picked up on by Hobbes, who translated History of the Peloponnesian War as one of his first works. The real cause, the thing that you can ultimately blame, he says, is not ideologies. Those are actually the fruits of the cause, not political parties, not even economic class, even though this was, to a certain extent, a war between the rich and the poor, playing out in Corcyra. Rather, Thucydides says it's the desire to rule, animus dominendi. It's the ambition to have power over others, the pleasure that people get from having power. Now, Hobbes learned from Thucydides, not everybody has an equal measure of this desire for power. Some people have more than others. And so he said, for instance, in the state of nature, you might have only a few who are very eager, so eager to rule over others that they're willing to risk their lives to do so. And they subdue others because of this, okay? And they create a situation in which everybody is forced to fight because they won't be left to hide or to live in peace. That's what causes the war of all against all, according to Hobbes. So he learned well from Thucydides. Thucydides says, there are some who look to the context, in this case, war, or it could have been plague in a previous example. If there's a situation in which things are up for grabs, so to speak, when the normal order of everything is thrown out of kilter, when there's chaos and confusion, there are certain people who look to take advantage of that. And they use ideologies and political parties and religion and even economic class-based arguments in order to divide and manipulate people to become their foot soldiers. Hobbes said this about the English Civil War. Kind of reminds me of what Burke said later about the French Revolution as well. He also knew that it was a few people who, in his view, ginned up revolution, not so much to bring equality to everybody as to have power. And that, of course, became very evident in the French Revolution's terror. Okay, so all the way back in ancient times, we see Thucydides zeroing in on this same thing. Now, he teaches us, as we know from the quote at the beginning, that ultimately there's nothing we can do about the fact that there will always be some people for whom this is a particularly strong drive. Human nature will always be what it is, and we will always have wars. But Thucydides is also trying to warn us. And he's trying to warn people who can make decisions about these things, whether to join parties, whether to recognize and stop people who want to use these types of mechanisms to control others. And even if that wasn't his intention, as a reader, as somebody who reads it today, it's important to realize what we can learn from Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War and this episode of the Corcyrean Revolution. We can learn to be skeptical. This is what a high quality education that starts with the classics and moves forward is designed to bring out in people, is political wisdom, the wisdom to know better, right? To ask the question, who benefits, before writing a check or before joining a particular movement, who benefits and who should benefit. So this is a great reason for reading a work like the History of the Peloponnesian War. I hope you got something out of this, and I'm going to continue with Thucydides until Jacob and I start up the short series on agricultural biotechnology and the information economy. All right, bye.